Thank you, Gary. Thank you, Rena, all the organizers for having me here today. It is a pleasure to be here, part of the conversation and part of the community that is so deeply committed to serving some of the most vulnerable residents in our communities. And it was great to hear. Oh, thank you. I'm short, so this helps. And it was great to hear from Daniele. He always has very insightful and very inspiring words to share. But I think it's also important to have both provincial and federal government at the table here in this room, in this community, especially because of the scale and the scope of challenges that are in front of us. And as some of you might know, all orders of government have been investing in housing and homelessness solutions and services year over year. However, access to housing, availability of housing, specifically supportive and affordable housing, continues to be a limitation for all of us across the system. An increasing supply of affordable and supportive homes will be key in our collective efforts to making sure that our residents not only have a safe place to call home, but they have communities that they can thrive in. And so it is in this context that Build Canada Homes was established to really scale up delivery of affordable and supportive housing across Canada. And we do this through a number of ways. So we are activating federal land so that we can directly build mixed income communities and housing for residents. We're also providing flexible financial tools to housing projects that need help to get from construction readiness to construction start. And we're also catalyzing modern methods of constructions so that we can build faster at scale. And that's really, I think, what sets Build Canada Homes apart, because we're one federal agency bringing land, financial solutions, and development expertise under one roof. We're not here to replace any existing funding programs, any existing funders or partners at the table. We're actually here to bring projects and partners together so that we can go beyond building one housing project at a time, so that we can actually enable portfolios of projects that can be built over many, many years, and also ideally help create a healthy pipeline of projects that can go into modular manufacturers and factory-built environments. And so we've been hitting the ground running pretty quickly. Since we were established in the fall, we have already identified 6 sites across Canada that can build 4,000 homes, mixed income homes, including affordable and market homes across Canada. The much anticipated Canada Rental Protection Fund, which will provide $1.5 billion in funding and financing to nonprofits to be able to purchase properties that are at risk of being lost and convert them to affordable rental housing, will be kind of released in the next few weeks. We have actually prioritized spending our $1 billion that is set aside for supportive and transitional housing, because we know that's where the need is the greatest and most urgent. And we're also investing quite significantly in our partnership with provinces, with territories, with municipalities across Canada. So just a kind of a closer look at some of the work that we're doing with provincial partners around supportive and transitional housing. And I want to talk about the 2 deals that we have made with British Columbia and Quebec, where supportive housing has been front and center into these partnerships. So in BC, through our partnership, we can support 1,100 affordable rental homes to get shovels in the ground this year, and that includes 700 supportive homes that are getting both capital funding from Build Canada Homes and British Columbia, plus operating funding that's coming from the province. In Quebec, we're helping to support 865 new affordable and supportive homes. Again, about 400 of them will be supportive for people experiencing homelessness or at risk of homelessness. And so this can kind of show you how these partnerships between federal and provincial governments can create the type of regional impact that we need at a very, very high numbers, so that we can actually help people who are struggling with finding a home. And this will not be a housing presentation if we didn't talk about definition of affordable housing. So at Build Canada Homes, we really ground our definition of affordable housing in the fact that households should not be paying more than 30% of their income on housing. So not only we're taking an income-based approach, but we're also taking a local-based approach. So the numbers that you can see here are basically affordable rents for Vaughan, Ontario in 2026. We have a really good tool, useful tool on our website where you can put in the community where you're planning to build a home. It goes all the way to a census subdivision, and then you can also choose, when the year that you'll be getting to leasing up, and it will show you the levels of affordability per BCH definition. And we have 4 layers of affordability. So you can build housing for people with very low income all the way to median income, because we know many of our workforce housing and including people who are who have a part-time job or are just getting their first job out of the university, they need affordable homes. And we're also focusing quite a bit on non-market housing. So housing that's created by the public sector, by nonprofit, co-op, indigenous sector, because again, we know that's where you get the long-term affordability. That's their mandate. They're here in it for the long haul, and they want to maintain the affordability, not just for this year and next year, but hopefully in perpetuity. And I want to take a moment to really emphasize kind of around how we partner with organizations and with housing providers. So our approach to partnership is flexible by design because we know what the type of support that a project needs, for example, in a rural area or in Thunder Bay is very different from a mixed income project in major urban areas. So we're not necessarily prescribing a box that says, give us X number of units, X number of affordable units at these rates, and you will get X amount of dollars in return for those, because we know that doesn't work for every project. We don't have minimum unit thresholds. We don't have minimum affordability. We're not prescribing what level of affordability you're using. We want to work with you on a case-by-case basis and see what your project needs to be able to make that last funding gap basically filled. And so based on that, we take a very partnership-based approach in our funding and in our investments. But that's not to say that every project is the same, right? So we do have an investment framework that really focuses on what we need to prioritize for our funding. So first and foremost is about depth and length of affordability. And that's our mandate. We want to build more affordable housing at scale. We also look at the strength of the partnership that each project brings to the table. We want to be able to see that you have already identified other funding partners at the table to help you make the project happen. We also look at kind of the use of innovative modular or factory-built approaches, as well as Canadian materials and Canadian supply chain. And shovel readiness will continue to be a priority for us. I would say, when we first started last year, we were very keen on getting projects that can start construction in 2026. We already have more than enough of projects that have put their proposals forward that are getting to construction start in 2026. So we're already starting thinking about projects that can get into the ground in the next 24 to 36 months. And so we, to be honest, have been happily overwhelmed by the number of proposals that we have been getting at Build Canada Homes that, check 1 or 2 or even 3 of the boxes that I just mentioned. And just unfortunately, because we don't have unlimited amount of funds, we really are looking for proposals that stand out. And so what stands out for us is really, if I can explain it, is twofold, right? So your project needs to get the basics right, the fundamentals right. So what I mean by that is that if your project needs to be able to demonstrate the need for public investment. If you have a project that can be financed through existing sources of funding, through conventional lending, really there's no room for the government, be it BCH or other sources, to come in. So demonstrate the fact that there is a good value for investment and that there is a need in your community that you're trying to serve. Then we will look at, projects that have a clear and balanced capital stack. And so what I mean by that, if that is a project that's coming to us and it shows 95% of the construction cost needs to come from BCH or another source of funding, that is not balanced. So you actually need to have multiple partners, multiple sources at the table. That includes land, that includes financial incentives that will be provided by municipalities, grant funding that will come from other government partners, fundraising, equity that you have as a proponent to put in the project. So we look at projects that actually have other sources of funding identified and at the table. And we also look at projects that can show us they can be operationally sustainable over time without a heavy reliance on operating funding. And I will set supportive housing aside because for supportive housing, you will always need operating funding to do the wraparound support services. But for many of the mixed income projects, we're looking at projects that actually can be sustainable over time without additional operating funding. So that's kind of on one side, kind of on getting the fundamentals, getting the basics right. And then on the other hand, we're looking at proposals that can lead on the innovation and on the partnership side. So again, the use of modern methods of construction, use of Canadian materials, having creative partnerships in the mix so that we know the project can rely on expertise coming either from the nonprofit, the private sector, or municipal and nonprofit sector. So we can actually see all the partners at the table really driving in the same direction. And I talked quite a bit about modern methods of construction. So maybe let's take a moment and see what we mean by that at Build Canada Homes. So we actually, again, intentionally taking a very broad view into what we call modern methods of construction. It is really what we mean is really industrialized forms of construction. So it can be anything from volumetric modular to prefabricated structures to panelized structures all the way to 3D printing. And so we really are trying to kind of keep this as flexible and as open because we know, again, based on the context where you're building and the type of housing that you're building, be it high-rise or mid-rise or a single-family home, you will need access to one of these approaches, or in many cases, you need to actually use multiple of these approaches to construction. And lastly, again, I this is my last slide, but I did want to really finish my presentation by speaking about partnerships. So we are humble enough to know we don't have all the tools, all the funding, all the resources to bring to the table to get housing built, especially the type of affordable housing at a scale that we need. We can bring land, we can bring capital funding, we can bring the kind of the deal making expertise to the table, but we also need other orders of government. The provincial governments across the country can bring operating funding, but they also bring the services or the access to services across systems, from health to housing to social services to justice. Like Daniele was talking about, we actually need that whole of government and whole of community approach because housing is just not a brick and mortar. It's actually what happens, this type of support services that people get when they're housed that will make the difference. We also need municipalities at the table. They also control land. They also control municipal approvals and permitting process. But most importantly, we rely heavily on the nonprofit, Indigenous, and the co-op sector, as well as the private sector to actually work on the ground. They have the expertise to work on the ground, to build the housing, to bring the construction capacity, to bring the support services that they're really, they're the experts in providing and serving their communities together so that we can actually invest our funding where the need is greatest. And together, hopefully, we can build the next generation of affordable and supportive homes for Canadians. And with that, I want to thank you again, and thank you, Rena and Gary, for the opportunity to speak to you today.
Thank you. Don't go anywhere.
No. Okay.
If I can have the wireless mic brought up here, please. So something tells, first of all, thank you very much. Greatly appreciated and thanks for coming. Something tells me there may be one or two questions from the crowd, but I promised Mercedes we take it a little bit easy on her, particularly since, how many staff do you have now? Two? Okay, so she's in the process of staffing up. So if you know anyone who's looking for not-for-profit housing, let me know. But most importantly, and all joking aside, when the National Housing Strategy came out, the ICC and many of the member agencies here advocated very hard to get across to the federal government the tremendous need for housing for those with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And as everybody here knows, vulnerable community was listed with up to 2,400 units. As Build Canada Homes is now ramping up, is getting organized as the new legislation has passed, please remember individuals with developmental disabilities as National Housing Strategy 2.0 is coming up. We are very involved in those discussions to make sure it's there, but please, the need in Ontario alone is 40,000, 40 years, but from being across the country, it's the same everywhere. The need is tremendous and your support is needed. So with that, Anne, can I impose on you to rove around with the mic to whoever has questions to make sure everyone can hear? And who has questions for Mercedes? Please raise your hand. No questions. Look at that. Okay, seeing no questions, Brian Keshen has a question. Brian can always be counted on. Do you want the mic here or on the hand? Okay.
Yeah, no, I get them there.
Yeah, thank you. It's exciting time, but a bit of a challenge as we're dispersed small organizations across the country. And so trying to figure out that base framework to go from. So assuming someone has some form of equity, land likely, let's use land as the best example because it's material and you can really define what's going there. Most organizations experience a challenge of getting from that to zoning and getting to the place where you even know what your costs are so you can know what your stack is so you can have those conversations. In Ontario, most will be able to get waivers of development charges, put it on the table. Most get some advantage around their HST refunds and other things on that table. And many can plan for and carry a portion of a mortgage. They can't get a mortgage, but they can afford to, right? So is the mortgage portion, when you talked about that 95%, sort of that's unacceptable. So if people need equity of in the range of 50%, and they're able to bring land and those things, but they need a mortgage also for 50%. Is that something within Build Canada Homes, or is that you have to go to the market? And most of us can't go to the market because we're nonprofit. Everyone looks at our statements and you say, hey, you don't make a profit. I can't lend to you without charging you a significant. I mean, there are a few, Van City and a few others we've talked about at this table. So just how do we move forward in that context? Thank you.
Yeah, happy to. And Brian, thanks for the tour this morning. And you actually talked about the project that just finished and how you brought together grant, like your own equity, what you had at RENA. You brought it to the table. You started the work and started putting all the other pieces together. And that's the reality of building housing these days, right? That like there's no other sources of funding that will, there was Rapid Housing Initiative, I'll give you that, that would pay 100% of construction costs, but we're working and living in a different environment where everything is about how much you can leverage, how much you can use the government dollars to leverage, private capital and private equity into the mix. And so Build Canada Homes, we can do grant funding, we can do construction loan, we can do construction financing, we can do patient capital. So we have very flexible tools on the table. At the end of the day, we don't want to necessarily replace a loan that you can get from a bank, but if you can't get the loan from the bank because of net worth or assets or other reasons, that's where we can come in, right? So yes, we would be able to, if you have other pieces at the table, we would be able to come and look at the gap and actually think through with you what are some of the tools that we can bring to the table. So it could be a mix of grant and a repayable loan. It can be, you know, mix of grant and patient capital. So those are the pieces that we work, as I said, you know, very collaboratively with proponents. So it's not a program where you just apply and we either say yes or no. We actually give you feedback and we say, based on, you know, the model that you have, we think you can do X, Y, and Z. So we ask you to maybe, you know, sharpen your pencil a little bit, but we also come to the table with solutions and we say, okay, I might not be able to give all of this to you as a loan, but I can do X, Y, and Z. So those are the types of conversations that we're having on a daily basis with proponents. But really what matters is that you actually have thought through the rest of your capital stack, right? And we're not even asking for folks to have secured funding sources. We just are asking people, and some of you have heard this from me in meetings, we ask you to have a path forward, right? So if someone comes to me and says, oh, I actually need 95 or 90% of my funding stack to come from ACLP at CMHC, and I know that ACLP is so competitive, to me, that's not a viable path, right? So that's where we start talking about, so let's look at other sources of financing and how would different tools that we have or other partners have can come and support the project.
Thank you very much. I think the question there, and then we'll up here. Yeah.
Hi there. Thank you so much for the presentation. I had a couple of quick questions in terms of just the application process. So you had mentioned and alluded to in your presentation that there are a lot of proposals that you're reviewing. So I just wondered, is this a rolling application process? And then with respects to the $1 billion that's been kind of set aside for transitional and supportive housing, how much of that has already been allocated due to, like, because you also highlighted the different partnerships with the provinces. So just curious about that piece.
So yes, kind of on your first question, yes, this is a rolling application. You can put in your application anytime. We actually encourage proponents to come talk to us before you put an application. Because again, we're introducing a new way of supporting projects, a new way of providing financial support that's very different from, you know, our kind of previous funding programs. So we're encouraging everyone to, you know, set up a time with us. And again, Gary said, I only have 2 persons. So you're going to be seeing a lot of me in meetings when you reach out in the next little while. But we want to kind of learn about the project, learn about your organization, look at what you currently have in terms of putting your funding stack together. We can give you some feedback even before you put in an application. So really there's no deadline for putting your application in. Like, it's actually more helpful for us to have that pre-consultation with you and can give you the support and the feedback so that when you actually put in your proposal, it's actually closer to what we would need. And again, this is all because, you know, we know that this is a new environment, right? A lot of folks are used to, you know, CMHC programs where it was very specific. This is how much you have to do to get X dollar amount. And we're completely basically revamping that model. And we're saying, no, we want to actually see what your project needs. And then if we can help support fill the gap with our flexible financial tools. And sorry, their second question, supportive housing. So yes, need is great. And so our, you know, $1 billion across Canada, which is kind of part of our initial investment of $13 billion. We're almost halfway through kind of allocating those funds between either partnerships or specific projects. But again, we also are starting to talk about the need and the potential that still exists, right? So just in Ontario alone, you know, I still have a number of, you know, high quality projects that can take another, you know, $2 to $3 billion of funding to be built, right? So Build Canada Homes started with an initial investment of $13 billion. $1 billion of that was around supportive and transitional housing. And we knew that that's not going to be enough. So part of our job right now is actually to be able to start thinking about what the next tranche of projects could look like should there be additional funding made available to Build Canada Homes.
Thank you. And if I could ask everyone to introduce themselves and what organization they're from with the questions, but to your point about you need more money, well, everyone here knows perhaps I talk about advocacy once or twice. This is the perfect opportunity to speak to your members of parliament. And when you go and speak to them, the exact ask is, we love Build Canada Homes. They need more money for supportive housing. And when you go and speak to your MPP, the absolute ask is, we need you to work in conjunction to make sure we can guarantee the operating funding.
Just in terms of, one of the things that's great about the portfolio projects that you're doing is that, especially in the context of ICC, is that you're accepting portfolios that cross provincial boundaries, so you can get a national package application in. One of the things which is concerning, though, is just with regard to the approval of the capital funding for those portfolio projects, there's a requirement that one of them be shovel-ready within 12 months. But say you had a portfolio with 10 projects, one a year for 10 years. From talking with the City of Toronto with their portfolio application, you've done approval of capital funding for one of their projects, but haven't really given them any indication with the rest. And building on what Brian was saying earlier, I'm just thinking that perhaps if there was a way for BCH with regards, say, to that example, to give conditional approval for the other 9 projects for, say, 20% capital funding, that's something that people could take to the bank and say, look, we're looking for capital funding for our 80%. We've got a conditional approval from the federal government that this is a robust project. And it's not so much of a guarantee, but I think it would certainly go a long way to opening doors and giving access to private financing. So I'm just wondering what your impression is of that. Thanks.
Hi, Peter. Good to see you. You're 100% right, and that's really the goal for us, right? To be able, like, we are accepting applications that are at Class D estimate versus like CMHC was taking applications at Class B estimate, right? So we're accepting proposals at much earlier stage because we know, someone needs to be the first one in the mix, right? And that's why, again, we don't ask for confirmed sources of funding, be it even a loan, at the application stage. We're saying, just show us a viable path, show us your cash flow so that I can see you can carry the debt. And then we're happy to come in and be the first partner at the table. We do provide conditional support so that you can take that and take it to CMHC or other sources. So we definitely do that. At the end of the day, we're still a public funded government, program or agency. And so we still need to do our due diligence on every project, right? Because we want to make sure that if we're basically putting money, reserving money for a project, it has a viable path to go forward. Otherwise, there would be other projects that could be funded and we're not funding them because our money is sitting somewhere. So we do quite a bit of due diligence with proponents to make sure that we understand the projects and their viability path from the get-go. But knowing that, yes, our conditional approval can go in earlier in the process so that you can attract other sources of funding. So that's totally part of how we're thinking about portfolios as well.
Thank you. I'll also remind those people online, if you have a question, please type it in the chat and Joseph will follow up. Susan will get you in just a second. Anne's having problems walking up to the front, but she'll get there. Yeah, so Susan, yeah.
There she is.
Oh, what happened there? Yeah, no, that's not you. That's them.
Thank you so much. Susan Bizayon from Safe Haven. I was just wondering if you could comment on your second last bucket, which is the nonprofit and the alliance. So for us, certainly you can see today we're a very strong community. We're really working together. And when you're looking at closing the gaps, obviously the finance piece is a huge issue for many of these organizations. But can you talk about that nonprofit alliance? Because many people will definitely align with us. And I just want to get a sense of that, what it looks like. You talked about cultural nuances, Indigenous, but also in terms of what weight do you put on that? because it sounds like it's a very flexible model, but what does flexibility mean? You obviously have some kind of an algorithm in terms of how you weight that and how you give people the support. So I think as this evolves, so you're probably going to get more kind of structure and clarity on it. But I'm just think for people who are really trying to really access this funding, and we can see the people who are accessing it obviously have deep pockets and a lot of resources, and many of us don't have that. So I'm just trying to get a sense of how you weight some of these different categories and what that can really help, especially for this community. Thank you.
Thank you. And yeah, I had the chance to meet with your team just this past week and get to know your project a little bit better. I would say majority of our approvals to date have been with provincial government territories and municipalities where, and or supportive housing projects where they're getting 100% grant funding from Build Canada Homes. So we're very mindful that if we want to grow the share of non-market housing in our systems, that our priority and the way that we work with nonprofit and co-ops and Indigenous groups will need to be different. So for example, we are prioritizing our grant funding for the nonprofit sector. So when the private sector comes to the table, we're actually looking at more short-term loans, repayable loans, patient capitals that can be repaid back to the government so that we can reinvest that. Versus with the nonprofit sector, there's a lot more flexibility that we have to provide grant funding as long as the project itself, can demonstrate value for investment. And also that, there's depth of affordability being provided, right? Because when I talked about definitions of affordability, we have everything from very low income to median income. So if someone comes to me and say, oh, I'm doing, 100% of my units at median income, which is close to market in most jurisdictions, but I want all of my, ask as grant funding, that to us that is not aligned, that's not balanced, right? So we try to really prioritize that grant funding for nonprofits, co-ops, and Indigenous sector, but also for where you're providing low affordability. But we also know it's a balance, right? So if you also come and say, oh, I'm doing 100% of my units at, rent geared to income, that means that you cannot carry debt, right? So we really look at that, and that's why we don't have like a very set and a specific amount of affordable housing that we require. We sometimes work with proponents and say, let's change the model, the affordability mix a little bit to see if you can do a little bit, more affordability here, less affordability here. And that's why portfolio projects are good in that sense, because you can actually achieve better affordability across multiple sites, because, you have a site, and I'm just going to use, Toronto because that's where I spend most of my career. And you have a, site in downtown Toronto versus Scarborough. You're not getting the same amount of even market rent out of those two locations. That the land value is not the same in those two locations. So across projects, the math is different. So that's why we really try to work with you on a project by project basis to see where we can provide. But in terms of working with the nonprofits, we already know that some of the challenges around, accessing financing either through ACLP or MLI Select or conventional lender. So that's part of the conversations that as a new agency, we're actually having with CMHC at the federal level to see how do we better align ourselves to support nonprofits. Because I know a lot of you were counting on Affordable Housing Fund, for example, that is no longer available. So we're trying to kind of at the federal level have those conversations to say, because we don't want some nonprofits to just be left out because they can't carry a conventional debt. So there should be other tools at the table, and we have some of that, but not all of them. So we're trying to have those conversations to make sure that we can support nonprofits in a good way.
Okay, I think we'll go for a question there and then a question up here. Okay. She's got the mic. She wins. Yeah. She'll come back.
My name is David from Tim Welch Consulting. Just wondering, in the absence of CMHC seed funding, that is a big question mark. A project that maybe has had a pre-consultation with the municipality but has no zoning in place yet. What would your approach be to that sort of project?
So good question. And I think, again, unfortunately, some of the main funding programs like seed funding, that was helpful to get projects from kind of that early inception to construction readiness are kind of winding down. I would say if you don't have zoning, you're not ineligible to apply to Build Canada Homes, but at the end of the day, it comes to when you're expecting to get to construction start and prioritization and the availability of funding that we have on a yearly basis, right? So zoning is not a requirement at the time of application; it's a requirement when you get to underwriting. But to be honest, we have a large number of projects that are already not only have rezoning, but are permit ready, right? So when we're making decisions for 2026, we're looking at the ones that actually have that certainty. But having that kind of that portfolio approach or multi-year approach enables us to also work with projects that are further down the line and might be kind of ready to get into construction in 2027 and 2028. So we do have that flexibility, and you're not ineligible if you don't have rezoning, but there's so much that we can do at that early stage, kind of while we have a larger number of projects that are more shovel ready and actually have all of their permitting done and ready to go.
Hi, Jennifer Croft from Community Living North Perth, which is based in a small town, Listowel, Perth County. There's a perception out there that Build Canada Homes is very urban centric. And when you're in a community that is 20, 30, 40,000 people, how do you perceive it working with a portfolio approach, knowing that sorry, my phone is going off. I know, very good timing. Knowing that it's smaller communities and we can't do the same scale.
And so that's, I think, a really good example where we actually are also thinking about partnerships, right? So you're not alone in the region, right? So we are encouraging municipalities, to be honest, when they come to us with portfolios, to actually bring in their portfolios projects that are led by nonprofit organizations in their communities. And we're actually putting them, I hope there's no municipal representative here, but we're actually putting them on the hot seat, and we're asking them some tough questions to say, what are you doing to expedite approvals? What are you doing to provide incentives? How are you supporting these projects, right? So that's one of the ways that kind of you can participate in a portfolio. The other way is around connection to modular manufacturers, right? So we have a number of nonprofits that are working with the same modular manufacturer as their vendor, so they can come in again as another portfolio, and it can be led by the modular manufacturer or one of the nonprofits. So there are different ways that smaller groups can participate. But I don't want to take away from the fact that don't think that you cannot put your proposal forward on your own, right? Like we still are, I'm reviewing application with 8 units, 12 units in rural areas on reserve. So that is definitely an option. I think that the challenge for us, or maybe not the challenge, but the mandates that we have is actually how to be a convener, how to bring these smaller projects so that we can actually, maybe through a collective procurement, we can get you a better deal, and we can get the modular manufacturers a healthy pipeline and capacity to work over the next, number of years. So that's really our intention, to be able to convene smaller projects through a common thread, be it, procurement, be it design, or, just the municipality kind of supporting a larger number of smaller projects.
Thank you very much. So looking at the time now, Mercedes we got one last question right over there. Go for it.
Yeah, sorry, and I just wanted to follow up, and I live just up county from there and represent 3 communities in the Grey Bruce region as well. And I just wanted to follow up just in terms of capital investment in small not-for-profits in rural and remote communities, and in our ability to raise funds is very, very limited. And sometimes I think that gets lost in the equation. But when government, federal and provincial, make those investments in those very small rural and remote communities with zero loans that we actually then have to repay, and you have deeply affordable housing, then it makes it actually possible for us to be housing providers and maintain the housing stock long term. So, and I don't know if that's actually part of that equation, but so we just did receive $4.5 million from CMHC, to build 10 units in Owen Sound, and we're halfway through and what that means to that community and what it means for our ability to maintain it in the long term without sustainable, it has huge impact. So I just want to make sure that you are aware of that, and that continues to be on the table when our small communities are submitting 10-unit buildings and the profound impact that it has. And if we can do it with no debt, it's hugely, hugely impactful for our community. So thank you.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that comment, and thank you for raising that. And that's, I think, one of the reasons why we don't have a box, right? We say for what makes sense in Toronto, in Richmond Hill, in Vaughan versus what makes sense in, Simcoe or Bruce County, very different. And so, yeah, that definitely wanted to maybe just emphasize grant funding is on the table where it makes sense. And that's why we actually, we kind of work with proponents like an open book process, right? So we look at your cash flow and see what you can carry and what you cannot carry. As long as, again, I know I've been spending a lot of time on just the funding model, but it's the depth of affordability that you talked about, right? It's knowing that you're going to be able to provide deeply affordable long-term for your resident. And if you're using some, modern methods of construction in your construction, and if you have support, either through land or, some small support from your municipality, your county, your district, those all go a long way.
Well, Mercedes, thank you very much. Greatly appreciate. Please remember, the need is great. From emails that we sent around, there are at least 15 shovel-ready projects within the ICC that will now start to work with you. And I want you every day when you are in your office to remember the individuals that we collectively support. And on behalf of the ICC, some artwork from Rena, and thank you very much. And I understand you can stay for a few more minutes. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.